the Purview engineering team. And as the title says, it's CXC, which basically means customer experience from engineering. So I lead the DLM, CM, and audit services. And in my role, I interact with customers, partners, making them aware of what's coming in the product or the service, and also engage with customers on private reviews so that we can learn on the experiences, the performance, the changes, and then give feedback to my peers in the engineering. Now, this presentation would have not been possible without support of Rahul, who is the DLM global leader. So he's the person along with his team members who is responsible to drive changes, the innovations that we bring in the DLM service. And today, the session is about the Purview data lifecycle and records management solution, what we released in the recent months. And I'll also give you a view into what we are working on and planning to release in the coming months. Coming to the era where we operate in, while the Purview data lifecycle management software is part of the Purview family, but I'll take you through the journey today on how customers are using it, specifically in the era of AI today. And while the product still has broadly two services, which is data lifecycle management and records management. But the topic today and the conversation today would be around how DLM and records management is helping customers adopt AI with more confidence, and also ensure how AI services, AI applications that they're building also feed onto right set of data, which broadly is part of governing your data in AI era. Now, as we talk about DLM and records management, so the data lifecycle management, while some of you are already using it, some of you already are aware of it, while I'm assuming to set up the ground so that for folks who are joined this call and are new to DLM, they also have a view into what DLM and RM does. So data lifecycle management, it helps you manage the documents, the data that you have in your data estate, so that you can reduce the risk or liability, and you only keep the data that you need. So if there is a data which is 10 years old or 20 years old, and there is no need to keep that data, you really want to delete it and purge it or move it out of your tenant. While maintaining the data is one aspect of what organization wants to do. The second is when you look at from a regulatory lens, which is records management. When you go into organizations where a decision is taken to acquire a company, where a decision is taken to give a dividend, where a decision is taken to make some changes in the organization, most organizations want to record it so that later, if there is a query, legal query, which is often called as litigation, or they have to go through what they did few years back, there is evidence and data records available, which are mostly immutable. Now, this requirement comes as part of various regulation, and that's why I said, as we move into the records management, we pretty much are moving into the legislation or the regulatory lens. And this lens even becomes more focused when you go into the public sector or into the government organizations. And the era we are living in, if a government is taking a decision, what were the facts they took into consideration to take that decision? And that gets kind of managed, recorded for a long duration. So which is where the records management as a software comes handy, which is used to manage high value content, has specific workflows to meet legal, business, or regulatory requirements. So these are two distinct services. Both these services are present in your Purview family. And when you log into compliance.microsoft.com, which today has a new portal view, whether you go to a classic view or the new view, on the left-hand side, you will see both these solutions and respective configurations that you can do in these solutions. Let's now look at what are the business drivers for DLM and RM. And I'll also call out what were the classical drivers or the old drivers. And I'll also call out what are the new drivers that we are observing as we do conversations with the customers. So let's pick the classical driver first. And like I said, regulatory laws, financial regulations for companies who are publicly listed in US, where SEC, which is Security Exchange Commission, has certain regulations. Similarly, FINRA and CFTC, which are again regulatory bodies, they have certain regulations that if you are a public listed company or a company under the FINRA Act, the decisions that you take needs to be recorded for a long duration. Sometimes it's 20 years, 30 years, sometimes it is forever when you look at the public sector companies. This process of keeping, maintaining the records, and the records could be email, records could be documents, records could be artifacts that were assessed to take a decision, needs to be maintained for long period. Record keeping regulation such as New Zealand Public Records Act or National Archive Acts in Australia or other archive acts in different countries enforce customer to look at solutions so that they can maintain records, create them as immutable, save it for long duration, archive it. And that's the view that we have from a regulatory perspective, that you need DLM and RM as services in your organization. What we have seen in last 2 years, and specifically in the last 4 years, we have seen most organizations are taking the risk of cybersecurity seriously. 10 to 15 years back, security and cybersecurities were still there, but they were not a board member discussion. There wasn't as much focus on cybersecurity a decade back as we have seen in the last 4 to 5 years. If you look from a cybersecurity perspective, and you're talking of antivirus and EDRs and firewalls, so that the actors, the bad actors, don't kind of get into your organization, what you're looking at is preventing the loss of data. If a bad actor is in your tenant, if the bad actor is in your organization, more likely, in addition to the attacks like DOS attack, there is always a risk of data exfiltration. And we are living in an era where if a data gets exfiltrated as part of the Data Protection Act, as part of the Privacy Act, as part of other regulations, you have to report the data loss to the respective regulators and also pay fines. Now, this has kindled a need in the organization that why am I keeping so much of data when I could actually either archive it or get rid of it? The challenge is, if you ask IT to get rid of data for the last, which is more than 10 years or 15 years, IT is not the owner of the data. The owner of data could be somebody in finance. The owner of data could be somebody in HR. The owner of data could be somebody in a business unit. So why not have a process where the business owners of the data, the business owner of the document, review the document and say, yes, I think it's too old. I don't need it. Please go ahead and delete it, and let the system delete it. But the business driver to use DLM and RM is still breach risk reduction. So you really want to reduce the risk. Now, how are you reducing the risk? Because you are deleting the unwanted data, you are deleting the data which was sensitive, but you don't need it today. Whether it is contracts which were 20, 30 years old, whether there are invoices, whether it's a PII data of customers who's 10, 15, 20 years old. Now, why am I saying 10, 15, 20 years old? Because a lot of regulations of data, and if you're a bank, if you are, let's say, an insurance, the regulations will expect you to retain data for 5 years or 10 years. If you've taken a home loan, mortgage for 30 years, it's fairly obvious that the bank will maintain that file, that set of records for 30 years, or maybe more, 40 years, because who knows, after you close your home loan, you still need some data for regulatory filing, for tax filing. So there would be certain business use cases that will prompt the organization to save the data for a duration that is of that contractual nature. if you're taking, let's say, a business loan for 5 years and maybe 10 years. But the essence is, after that regulatory period is over, after that necessity period is over, you really want to delete that data so that you have less data in your data estate. And if a cyber incident happens, whether the incident was of type data exfiltration, where a data loss was there, or the incident was of a nature ransomware, where your data could have got encrypted, you in any case want to get rid of unwanted data and hence reduce the risk of a breach and the risk it has if a breach happens. And that's why I've put it under breach risk reduction, which is becoming a, I would say, a pretty good driver for organizations using DLM RM, while they're not getting impacted with the right-hand side regulatory laws like FINRA or CFTC. Now, what you see on the left-hand side, which is very, very interesting with GPTs and AI becoming prominent, and you would see my talk track along this line, including some of the new innovations that we're bringing in the DLM RM software on these lines, which is on AI adoption. Today, most organizations who are adopting AI, they follow a two-step process. A is always a POC or an evaluation when they're evaluating. Now, most organizations, when they're evaluating an AI software, they're evaluating and training it on a subset of data. And larger the organization, the data runs into petabytes, and the visibility of data is across multiple SharePoints and Teams and OneDrive and on-prem and cloud storage of various vendors from Amazon to Azure. So the data estate is pretty large. And as the data estate is pretty large, the moment you deploy AI, let's say in my conversation, so that you can visualize, we'll keep talking of co-pilot, let's say productivity co-pilots. The moment you bring in co-pilots into your organization, those co-pilots are going and sniffing and searching and kind of crawling across data and learning from the data. But imagine if in your organization you have data which is 10, 15, 20 years old, which again these AI applications go and learn from it. But look, you really never wanted the AI application to learn the old tricks because they're not relevant in the today's era. That's why the term which Gartner came up with is rotten data, obsolete data. So organizations over a period of time never had good habits, I would say, to delete data, and they carried data forever. And now, as they try to deploy AI applications in production across enterprises, the AI applications and going and reading all that old and obsolete data, which is resulting both into inaccuracy from AI results, but it's also leading to bias in the AI results because it's working on a rotten or a bad data. And this is where again DLM, which is data lifecycle management and records management capabilities come handy, so that you can delete the data which is no longer required for the AI application to get trained on, which also includes managing lifecycle of co-pilot prompts and responses, which I'll share as we move forward in our conversation. So if you take the AI lens and see how can DLM help you, we probably are looking at certain challenges in data management. First way is inconsistent and outdated data that you see on your left-hand side, which is unmanaged data, large data sets, which will reduce the AI model accuracy because you're feeding into a data set which is obsolete. Second is sensitive data exposure. Now, there are times when you have data, but this is confidential data, and you really don't want co-pilots to go and read that data because any user could go to Copilot and say, tell me about a confidential project. Let's say I'll specifically stick to the name of the project as Obsidian because when you look at other webinars from my CXC peers or other technical articles which are on Learn or other Microsoft sites, you would have a common project Obsidian getting referred. So for that reason, I'm leveraging this name Project Obsidian. So let's say you have a project Obsidian which has very confidential documents, and you don't want co-pilots to read data from Project Obsidian. Now that's again a need which comes in so that your AI is healthy and reading into the right set of data. Now, while the work that gets done or the policy that is needed to ensure that co-pilots are not reading the data which is sensitive comes into DLM. So comes into DLP. Our discussion is more on the DLM, but that's one of the challenges in data management as well. Also, data silos and scattered information. So data is stored across structured, unstructured, various places. How do you have a view into that data? You really don't know how many sites and OneDrives were created by HR team over a period of last 10, 12 years. A lot of folks came in, moved out, uh, been promoted in the organization, and there's a lot of data that they've created which still is there. So how do you get a full view into that? And while you can make policies that any data which is 7 years old and 6 years old, think of a scenario where you want resumes which are 4, 5 years old resumes, you really want to delete them. But you really want that to go through a process so that there is an authority who deletes it. So there is a disposition process. It goes to the HR manager who's the incumbent HR manager. Let him take a call that he needs to delete the data, and then the system deletes the data. Now, he took a call of and said yes to deletion of data. That gets recorded, that gets into the audit log so that there is a trail. So all of that is out of the box available in data lifecycle management and records management. And as we move forward, I'll share with you certain use cases as well, which will kind of set a note as to how you could use DLM RM within your organization. So on the right hand side is what you see as the benefits that would be there as you use the DLM and RM. I'll also encourage you if you have any questions, because as we're going through this content, I'm sure you'll have some questions. So feel free to post those questions on the chat. And once we're done with the session, we'll go through those questions and I'll do my best to answer them. But if some of those questions need a correlated answer or add-on response from my peers, then we'll let you know and then post it as well on when we post this video and recordings. Now let's look at the use cases that we see today. And if you look at pharma and banking industries, they're heavily regulated. So as a result, they really need to retain data based on certain events that happen. Let's say you take a loan for 10 years, then you need to retain the loan documents 5 years after the loan was paid. Now, this brings in a very unique use case. Some loan takers will repay the loan faster than 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, whatever the duration of loan was. So this is what we call it as an event triggered. So you want to retain the loan documents 5 years until the last EMI was paid or after the last EMI was paid or the loan was closed. So which means you need to trigger the retention of those documents, and retention is a generic phrase which we use. What that means is you want to be sure that the documents don't get deleted when they are living in their retention life or a retention period. So you could put a 5-year retention or a 7-year retention. And now the critical thing is, should the retention period start? Should the retention period start when the loan document was created, or should the retention period start after the last EMI for the loan was paid? And if the last EMI was paid in a particular year, then that becomes a custom event. So you have all the capabilities there in the software so that you can configure various settings. You can configure settings when the loan document got created. You could configure the setting when an event like last payment happened. So those are scenarios which come in so that it can decide and help you make policy around how long you want to retain the documents or those files. And then what happens after that retention period is over. So after that 5 years or 7 years that you've set in a policy gets over, what do you want to do? Do you want to automatically delete it? Do you want to remove that retention label? Or do you want to trigger a workflow? Do you want to trigger an inbuilt workflow in the system, or do you want to trigger a custom workflow? If it's a custom of workflow, what's the logic you want to write? So those are various options that you will have. And there are certain enhancements which I'll take you through what we've made recently in the capabilities of the DLM software. The uh, the other scenario in this could be the clinical trials. So when you do clinical trials, you want to retain data for 3 years or 5 years or 10 years after the clinical trial ends, which again is a kind of an event. So the solution, what you see on the right hand side, could be data could be retained and managed by configuring these retention labels as per those policies. And like I said, you have various options, including events or time periods that you can define so that data can be retained for that duration. You also have a need of protecting and managing sensitive data, intellectual property, like banking and pharma sector handles a lot amount of data, diagnosis data, intellectual property like research, and you really want to retain it, shouldn't get accidentally deleted. So there are ways in which you can effectively do retention labels, and there are settings in retention labels that you can configure so that any unauthorized deletions are prevented, even modifications are prevented, again, which we call it as, and we are moving now into a realm of records management where you declare it as a record. So the users can't even change it. And if you make it a regulatory record, then even administrator cannot change it. So it's kind of immutable. You can't change it. Even administrator can't change it. Now, disposition of outdated data, which again is a part and parcel of making sure your AI remains healthy. This is where you really want to kick in some kind of a process. Now, in the process, do you want automatic? Do you want single approver? Do you want two approvers? Those are options most organizations are presented with, and they configure policy so that a secure disposition is done and there is a reviewer who reviews the disposition which is done. I'll also share with you certain capabilities that we release so that post disposition or as part of this, you can archive it rather than dispose it, which again we'll discuss as we move forward in the slide. I'm also now building a view into the government sector, which is mostly when you look at the government, the decisions that the government takes, and as we interact with some of the leading governments, they probably are almost maintaining infinite years that they really want to retain the data forever. They took a policy decision on migration. They took a policy decision on financial aspects of the country. They really want to retain that data forever. And those are configurations that we are seeing in the government sector where DLM RM gets extremely handy, for departments across the government. So I'll let you read these slides as we share that with you. And we'll also do a quick poll and I'll let you folks type in and we'll get the data correlated with our teams. Today, what do you currently use to meet these requirements? And you could probably even say, are you meeting these requirements with DLM RM, with a third party system, or you're not even considering these requirements today? So I'll give you maybe 15 seconds before we resume with the other parts of the session. Okay, thanks for folks who have typed and answered. Now let's move into the releases, the recent releases that we have. And then I'll move into a section of future releases that we have. And in the recent releases that we have, let me build this view for you. So what we have done is we've probably taken three verticals here. Uh, the middle vertical is the enhancements we have done in improving the user experience. On the right hand side is any changes that we brought in on the core records management, and on the left is changes and features and capabilities that we brought in the labeling and policy options. So whether it is retention policy or retention labels, what changes we are bringing in here. What I've done for you is, because we do these sessions on a quarterly basis. So if you look at the last quarter session that we did somewhere 3 months back, you will not see the items which are highlighted in yellow. These are the new things. So I will go fast on the ones which we've already covered and spend a little more time on the ones which are highlighted in yellow. Okay, so let's go on them one by one. Now, this is, as I said, we're pivoting more to the AI, and this is generally available. So this is where you can manage retention and deletion policies for Copilot for Microsoft 365 interaction. So Copilots are becoming very pervasive. Now, when a user interacts with Copilot, there are two parts. A, the prompt that you write, and based on the prompt that you write, the Copilot goes and searches and then gives the response. Both prompt and response is called interaction. Now, admins can manage retention and deletion policies for prompts and responses sent and received when interacting with Copilot. So we're giving you capability. You could say, okay, the users are typing prompts, they're getting responses. I want to kind of retain whatever they're doing for 1 year, 2 year, 3 months, or 6 months. Now, this data is getting recorded and saved. Now, you can use tools like eDiscovery to check who prompted what information was typed in, what kind of a response get. But I'll also kind of share with you that today, if you go into your compliance.microsoft.com, you will see on the top left a service which is called AI Hub. That's in preview. That's also picking this data that we are capturing. But when you make policy, then you're intentfully capturing that data so that you can use eDiscovery and other tools to pick it. Should I retain Copilot interactions? So user interact with Copilot, whatever they write, again is a policy decision that gets taken on an organization by organization. Right. It also kind of looks into what kind of prompts are allowed. And when you're looking at what kind of prompts are allowed to be written by the user, that again goes into the context of AI Hub and the policies you said, but here we are laser focused on the retention part of that. How long should the prompts be written? Again, I said, whether it is 6 months or 1 year would be industry to industry. And what we see as new AI regulations are popping up, the regulators would become sharper and specific as to what kind of minimum expectations they have on the prompt retention, so that organizations can prove that the users or other systems created or generated the content based on the prompts which were legitimate to be used. So today, if you build policies around it, and I'll probably in the next slide show you a quick video capture demo of that, you will see that there is a setting which says team chat and Copilot interaction. And when you select this setting, this probably policy gets applied. We're already closer to Ignite, which is next month, and I will also urge you to listen into the new innovations we are bringing around this during the Ignite period. So let me, as you see here, a policy is getting created. The policy is for Copilot, and I can give it a description and a name. And I am making it static. And as I move forward, now this is, let me go back, it moved pretty fast there. So let me go and pause there so that I can show you that it does has static. Okay, so if you see here, this is where a policy can be applied. So you made a policy, you set retention setting, which is in the next. So here you're pretty much selecting this option, which is Teams chat and Copilot interaction. And as you see the text, message from individual chat groups, chat, meeting chat, bot chat, and interaction with Copilot gets impacted with this policy. And I let it play so that you can see how it's coming. So I make it on. And here, if you look, I'm defining the time period. So I'm defining it, let's say 5 years for it to retain those settings. Okay. So the next is where we have a capability. The users can delete non-empty documents, library folders containing files. So users will not be able to edit the document on which retention label is applied and marked as locked record. So this is now generally available. So open lock records with the read-only permission. Earlier, what was happening, they were kind of downloading that. So this will ensure that the label is applied, marked as locked records, and this will prevent unauthorized edits to the sensitive documents. Now, the next one is users can delete non-empty documents, library folders containing many files on the site managed by a retention policy. Additionally, this feature ensures that folders that are covered under a retention policy have been deleted or do not appear for the users. Now, with this feature, end users can delete non-empty document library folders containing many files on a site managed by a retention policy. Coming next is a question, and again, I'll let you have some time to check if you're aware of that DLM can be used to prepare for Copilot deployment by getting rid of obsolete data. So again, you can type in your responses, yes, no, and if you're using this facility or you're using DLM to clean up your data estate, please do write that as well. Okay, let's look at the next one, which is changing the retention period on label set to start. So in retention, if you look at mostly it is when should this retention action start? Should the retention timer start when we create a document? Should it start when it is last accessed? Should it start when somebody copies it, modifies it? Now there are different trigger points when you want the counter or the time to start. So when should the retention labels be started? When should this timer start? You see these options. The moment you select, I want to retain item for 5 years or 3 years that you see on the right hand side, then it gives you an option, start the retention policy based on. And what you see is we have this new option when items were labeled. So whenever you label a file that, hey, this is an invoice, and in your organization, you might have a policy that invoices will be saved for 7 years. So this was not there earlier. Now, when you see the drop down, which is highlighted in the yellow, we have added this retention period setting so that your timer for retention, which in this case is 7 years, only gets started when the item was labeled and not when it was created or last modified. The next one is, if you look for large organizations, and this is something that we heard from large organizations as an ask. They're spread across multiple geos and departments, and they need to split responsibility by region or by department. So, for example, uh, they would have US administrators or administrators in Europe who would want to make policies for the European assets, for the European users. And when they log in, make the policy, they should only have access to their designated or responsible area. Now, this was not possible earlier. We had all the administrators who were global administrators. So when they made a policy, they were able to see all the policies. So if you even had a German administrator who was responsible for the European region and the policies in that region, he still was able to see all the global policies. Now, we have got this admin unit. So this allows you this capability. You can define an admin unit containing only US users or only European users or assets, and then you can go to the role management in Purview and assign record management role and scope of the US users to a US admin. So this will ensure a containerization. This will ensure an admin unit boundary that gets created, and the different regional or divisional administrators can perform their duties and responsibilities without having a view into the all of policies. Now, admin units can further be enhanced. You can also use adaptive scopes within admin units so that you can become more granular in your operations. The next is on the static and the adaptive policy scopes for SIT. So let me go through what that is. So let me define the SIT first. So mostly if you look at SITs, that's a terminology more popular in MIP, which is for sensitive information types. A common sensitive information type would be a credit card or a license or your passport ID. So let's say you want to apply a retention label, but not tenant wide. Let's say you want that any credit card in your emails is retained for 3 years. Now, you're a large organization. You have users in Japan, in India, in Europe, in US. You don't want to apply this policy tenant-wide. Now, until now, you could only apply this policy tenant-wide. So if you had the scenario that you wanted to apply to a small group of users, let's say you wanted to save it only for the European employees, it wasn't possible for small group of users, or it was not possible to apply for a subset of mailboxes. So this gives you flexibility with granularity, so that instead of a tenant wide, you have the include exclude option as exchange mailboxes of certain users. You can also use it with the adaptive scopes. You can say, okay, I really want to do this for only directors, only partners as part of the adaptive scope. So it kind of makes it more flexible, more granular, and most organizations I see will apply this to invoices or contracts and finance and procurement so that they can be retained for a different set of period is one of the leading use cases here. The other is on graph. Now most customers want to build their own workflows for items in SharePoint and OneDrive. They could apply or remove the labels of DLM in their custom workflow. So you have now Graph API available. You can apply or remove retention labels, lock, unlock records at scale with this new feature. The next again is also on the graph, which we have released. This again is GA, which is you can also track events and build workflow, specific workflow. Example, when a user leaves organization, you want to programmatically invoke retention of some documents. Earlier, you had to come to a portal. Now, this graph-based allows you to build those custom workflows. The next one is pretty powerful. So these are scenarios where at the end of retention period, let's say you were retaining invoices for 5 years or 7 years, or you were retaining your supply chain or supplier contracts for 10 years. And at the end of those 10 years, whether it's clinical trials or invoices, you can now set up Power Automate Flow and link it back either to in-service, or you can write flows by going into Power Automate. So this is a two-way. So either you can trigger a flow from within the when retention label expires setting within the DLM software, or you could go to flow, and flow now will be populated with the DLM actions. So with DLM actions available in the flow, you can pretty much write independent flow. They can trigger on a weekly, monthly, scheduled basis. And this kind of allows partners and customers to meet the niche requirement of certain industries to build specific record management practices and automation. It also allows integration with into other tools where either there is a need to add retention automatically with a flow or a workflow, or post retention trigger a deletion into ticketing system. So this pretty much opens a big magic word of automation around both the DLM and records management. Let's go to the next one, which is archiving. So most organizations, again, after retention period is over, still don't want to delete it, but they also don't want users to access it. So instead, they want to move this data into archive or an offline storage so that it's out of reach of users, but still accessible. Now, earlier, DLM was not supporting M365 archive. So with this update, you can archive site. It's a new feature. So once you archive sites, it's inactive. But whatever content is in the archive site, let's say if there is documents which have a retention of 10 years and you archive a site, those are still on it. So the trigger mechanism still goes. The archive site is there, but the DLM and the RM, the records management software, can go and still read in those archive sites. The next is where we have a modern group. Now, a modern group typically is where you can group it. And in a group, you can have Exchange mailbox and a SharePoint site. What happens when you delete a group? Now it becomes orphaned and you have a policy on the group. So this is more like I would say, a functionality cleanup that we have done. Because earlier when you delete a group, the Exchange mailbox becomes inactive after the deletion, but the SharePoint site still was active with a hold applied to it. And what most customers were doing is going to the CPC, which is the Compliance Policy Center, fetch the site ID and then do manual steps to kind of delete it. Now with this rollout, users will be able to exclude the relevant SPO sites from both explicit and a tenant-wide policy. So it's more like a way where it helps in disposing those orphaned objects if you are using group settings and policy around the groups. Next is enable deletion for the non-empty folders. So this again is a feature which solves two specific issues. One, folders that have been deleted may reappear for users who sync. And the other is end users are unable to delete document library folders that contain large number of files when that site is managed through a retention policy. So this again is more to do with fixing these issues so that any post synchronization issues are not there. It's a clean deletion. So that's pretty much what is already in public preview. Next, let's drop into some of the interesting things that we're building that are coming up. And like I shared, what I've done is I've highlighted compared to the last quarter session that we did. So we have moved and we have a GA date now for the retention policy and label supports for Teams transcripts without a recording. So that will go into GA in Jan 2025. So let's go very quickly on to some of these new enhancements so that we have some time for Q&A. Now, adaptive protection. So it's kind of self-learning. This is something uh, which we're doing with Insider Risk. This is one of my favorite, I would say, which is available, and it will go into GA in December 2024. Now, this is where when for customers who are using Insider Risk, the Insider Risk has a feature where based on a user behavior, it is moving user to a risky user container. And imagine a scenario where a user who's now seen as risky user, he goes and deletes thousands of documents in bulk. Now, this could be a major loss to a company. So what this feature does is, if you have insider risk configured in your organization and insider risk is tagging a user as a risky user, and whether it's picking the signal from HR system which says that the user is resigned and it's collaborating with a feature that a user is resigned and his document utilization and deletion rate is pretty much unseen in the last few years. So he's definitely a risky user. So then it gives a signal to DLM. And what essence happens is the DLM, even if the user has deleted the files, preserves the file. So, and it'll let the admin decide. So it gives you a kind of a buffer time period so that the admin can decide, because this user was a risky user. So this again is a feature which is come up, which kind of gives you I would say a data security layer in which one solution kind of picks up signal from another and gives you an ambient security, so that even if you are in security team and you don't end up discovering this post facto, there is a proactive way for one solution to give signal to DLM, who's responsible in preserving that data. We also have this feature which is there now in GA recently. Let's say a user accidentally sends a confidential email to a larger group. Now, if all these users who have received this confidential information, they were not supposed to get this information, these emails just can't be deleted like this. So this is a classical case of an accidental data spillage. And to contain the data spillage, you can search for these emails using this feature and then delete these emails, even though they're under retention, because this was an email which was supposed to retain, or this data was supposed to retain for 2 years or 3 years, because this was an acquisition data or acquisition decision. But look, it went to people more than what you expected or had to send. Now, which means we're going in the direction of principle where some data which ought to be retained for a longer period but accidentally got into the hands of employees where it shouldn't be. But look, I still want to delete it. Now, you can delete it, but given it was supposed to have retention for a longer period, we're giving you this feature of deletion, but it requires certain, I would say, additional checks. A, you will need to prepare a separate security role. Let's say a role where you have your legal head only in that role, so that this workflow gets his approval. Another way is what we see in most organizations, they set up a special protocol, a special workflow. So if you have to really delete it, you have to go through that protocol. So it's not data, and once deleted, this entire disposition needs to be signed off before the data can be deleted. So this pretty much ensures that you're able to track these actions, and there is a complete audit trail. in case of data spillage. Now, it's very important to note that this capability will not work for regulatory records because regulatory records are immutable. Once it's done, no power can kind of change it. So just a kind of call out there that these exceptions are only for data spillage. But if you had marked certain data as regulatory record, then you can't even go through this exception. The other is today transcripts, which are stored. So when you have the recordings and transcripts, they are stored in Exchange and OneDrive. They're pretty much stored in two places, so which presents a different operational challenge. Eventually, they'll be stored in one place, which is OneDrive for business. So with this change, all deletions will happen on ODB. So there are no two versions. So this again ensures a smoother deletion. And also this will ensure that if co-pilots are picking and reading that, then they only have one copy. And if you delete it, then they don't have the copy to read on. So again, part of cleaning up. Now, this is not a rotten data, but this is the unwanted data. So you're cleaning up the unwanted data fast. The last one or the second last one is where record opening behavior improvement. So previously, if you opened a locked record file in desktop clients like in Word and Excel, and you try to edit and save it, it will give an error. So it was loss of productivity. So if it's really a record locked file, why can't you open and read only? Why can't you give me some notification? So this is what we have brought in. So when the file opens in read only, it gives a notification for user that you cannot edit this file. So that's again an enhancement that saves time. Now, this also is related to Record Center. Look, before DLM and RM came into existence, we had MRM policies, we had Record Center. So that was a time when customers were leveraging Record Center and pretty much creating Record Center sites. We gradually deprecating it. So we announced this earlier in Jan 24. We started deprecation of Record Center. Now we have DLM RM, so we don't need the Record Center. So today, if you go and try to create a Record Center site, that's not available. So we're probably kind of deprecating that whole stuff. Okay, coming to as you move in, I'll also urge you what I've shared with you today, some of the new capabilities that we're bringing in. There's a lot more that we have on DLM RM, but given we are pretty close to the Ignite, which is in November, we really don't want to steal the thunder of some of the announcement that we as a team want to make it an Ignite. So I'll urge you to also look at the DLM and RM announcement that we plan to make next month during the Ignite session. So with that, we pretty much come to an end, and let's have some time for Q&A. So thank you guys for listening in, and let's see if we can also have your Q&A answered.
Great, thanks. The team's been great with answering questions in the chat. We do have a few that were unanswered. The first is, what functionality is provided by Purview to help with DLM and RM for content stored outside of M365?
Okay, so that's a really interesting question. So if you look, if the content is stored outside M365, then the flow is your best friend. We do have certain partners, and I will call out Epic and Protection as a partner. So if you have your data which is stored in cloud, Azure or Amazon, you could look at those workflows. I would also actively share multi-cloud is very high on the priority for the DLM and RM team. And as we move forward in coming quarters, you would hear more inbuilt capabilities in that direction. But today it is flow and partner solutions.
Great, thank you. The next question is, how can we exclude documents and emails with specific data from an AI search?
Great. So I think that's a capability that we have released as a feature in DLP. I think the business requirement is you really don't want AI to go and read content which is confidential. And sometimes the content may not be confidential, but you really want to create a boundary wall saying, look, I don't want the co-pilot to read this and then analyze this and give answers on this. So you should look at the feature which is in private preview in DLP, and also look at some of the announcements and try out AI Hub, which is in preview. That will also guide you to the policies which I just spoke, which are part of DLP.
Great, thank you. The next question is, how does AI help with data exclusion?
How does AI help in data exclusion? So I'll probably read it this way. AI will go and read the data wherever it finds. Now, when you do data exclusion, you are ensuring that AI is not reading the data you don't want it to read. Now, the reasons you don't want it to read could be many. Confidential, rotten data, old data. This doesn't make sense. It's a test data. Let's say you're in a clinical trial environment and you created some dummy clinical trials. You really don't want AI to go and read that data now. It's neither confidential, it's neither too old or rotten, but look, that's not the relevant data. So the data exclusion principles could be guided by various business drivers, and there are a lot of reasons you don't want AI to read that data.
Great, thank you. The next question is, does the Graph API now allow you to find all files that have a specific retention label or sensitivity label?
Okay, I will have to check if it can be done. The Graph API is there, but the moment you say all, that's something I'll come back to you.
Okay, great. The next question is, are there any specific certifications around DLM and RM tools or software?
I'm aware of some programs, which is Purview certifications. I let Aftab or Gary, if you have any view to that.
Okay, we can move on. The next question is, for the adaptive policies, will that change the labels on the objects when the user goes up and down in risk?
In the IRM, when you have, because A is adaptive policy, B is when you integrate with the IRM. So yes, it will.
Okay, great. The next question is, for admin units, does the user that needs to be given DLP role to view DLP alerts need to be part of the admin unit?
Yes, they got to be part of the admin unit.
Okay. The next question is adaptive protection limited to user behavior or risky users?
Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, is adaptive protection limited to user behavior or risky users?
Adaptive protection, yeah, because it's named adaptive because an insider risk as the behavior of the user changes, that's when he's put into the risky user bucket. So it is adaptive. So it is directly proportional to the user behavior. Yes.
Great. And the last question is there a PowerShell command that would give me the expiration date for a file?
Expiration date for a file. Look at SharePoint or OneDrive, you do have an expiration date, but the question is when you're building DLM policies, it runs a process and that process triggers either a disposition or other activity based on what you've selected. Now you can always get a date, but the question is the policy that you made. The timer for that policy is not always the expiration date. The timer for that is when you created, when it was accessed or modified. So yes, you can have a PowerShell. In fact, the SharePoint gives you that data, but the key is when you start leveraging the data in policies or in context of policies, they're created with the various start timers.
Awesome. That seems to be all the questions we have. So with that, I'd like to thank you, Ashish, for being our guest and for sharing the great information with our community. Also, thank you to the Q&A team who helped us with answering the questions and providing the resourceful information. To all the listeners still on the line, if you're someone who wishes to aid in the protection of the world from cyber threats and desire to have a say in shaping our strategies, blueprints, and recommendations, then we invite you to become part of our security community. Together, we can make a global impact. So join us at aka.ms/security community. This is also where you'll be notified about the upcoming webinars, events, and other announcements. For those of you who may have additional questions on the topic we just covered or other product-related questions, please feel free to raise them on our Microsoft Tech Community discussion space at aka.ms/Azure Purview Community. Thank you all for being part of our community and for joining us on these webinars. We hope to see you next time. Goodbye.